I grew up just over the border in West Virginia, but I've got family out near Roanoke. Always have. My uncle owns a chunk of land that butts right up against the Appalachian Trail, like literally touches it. A corner of the property crosses a fence line, and right on the other side is the trail itself. Growing up, we used to joke that hikers didn't realize how close they were to someone's backyard out there. But it's not like it feels like a backyard. That whole stretch is just thick woods, steep terrain, and if you're not used to being out there, it can feel endless and mean. I used to spend summers and long weekends there, especially in high school and the years right after. I'd drive over, park at the base of the property, and either stay with my uncle or hike back to this old hunting cabin we had about 2.5 miles into the woods. Nothing fancy. No power, no plumbing, no cell signal. Just an iron stove, a cot, and a deadbolt on the door. That cabin always felt like a different world. Quiet in a way most people aren't used to. And I don't mean peaceful quiet. I mean quiet. No cars, no buzz of power lines, no dogs barking, no nothing. When it got dark for real. Like inside a coffin dark. Anyway, I'd done that trip more times than I can count. I knew the trails, I knew the creeks, I knew where the deer liked to move. I knew how to get in and out of those woods blindfolded, or I thought I did. This happened in late September, that time of year when the leaves are just starting to turn, but the brush is still thick. Days are warm enough to hike in a t-shirt, but nights drop fast. I'd been feeling burnt out at work and wanted a few days to reset, so I took a long weekend and headed out to the cabin. Packed light, just a few days worth of food, some water, my sleeping bag, flashlight, knife, and a GPS I barely used. I liked doing things the old way, map and compass and knowing landmarks. I parked the truck at the old logging road gate and hiked in late Friday afternoon. The air smelled like dying leaves and damp earth, and I remember thinking it was the best I'd felt in months. I made it to the cabin just before sunset, set up my gear, got a small fire going inside, cooked up a can of chili, and then just sat out on the little porch watching the woods go dark. Something felt off, though. Couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't anything obvious. No sound, no movement, just a feeling, like the trees were holding their breath. I remember noting how still everything was. No crickets, no breeze, no distant owl hoots. It was the kind of stillness that makes you listen harder, which only makes it worse when you realize there's nothing to listen to. I went inside not long after dark, locked the door, more out of habit than anything. I've never seen a bear that close to the cabin, but you never know. I lay on the cot, let the stove die down, and listened to the silence until I drifted off. I woke up hours later. Don't know why. Maybe just the way you sometimes wake up when camping and don't know what time it is or why you're alert. The fire was long dead. The cabin was pitch black. I lay still for a second, trying to figure out what pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. A crunch, like a single footstep outside. Not wind, not a branch falling, not an animal. A human footstep on dry leaves. Then silence. I didn't move, just lay there, eyes wide, straining to hear. A long pause, then another crunch. Still slow, deliberate, like whoever it was had no intention of being quiet, but wasn't moving fast either. Just pacing? No flashlight, no voices, just steps in the dark, out in the leaves around my cabin. I reached down slowly and wrapped my fingers around the handle of my knife. Didn't want to move too fast. Didn't want the cot to creak. I was thinking through every possibility. Could be a hiker lost after dark, maybe trying to figure out if this was someone's camp. But that didn't sit right. If it were me, and I was lost, I'd be making noise, maybe calling out, and I'd have a headlamp or flashlight on. This was different. More steps, off to the right side now, still outside, still slow, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the cabin, moving in a wide circle. Just one person. I was sure of that. No shuffling, no underbrush snapping like you'd expect from a big animal. Just measured, careful steps on dead leaves, like they were checking out the cabin, like they were watching. I stayed completely still, knife in hand, heart hammering in my chest. Eventually, the steps faded off toward the east side of the cabin, and then nothing, just gone. I didn't sleep again that night, Kept waiting for the sound to come back. Thought about turning on my flashlight and looking through the window, but the windows didn't have curtains and I didn't want to backlight myself. I figured whoever it was might be watching for that. I lay there until the sky turned gray and I could see outlines again. When it got light enough, I unlocked the door and stepped outside, knife still in my hand. Everything looked normal at first, but when I walked around the cabin, I found the footprints. Not boot prints, sneakers. Tread was flat and worn, just one set. They made a half circle through the leaves around the east and south side of the cabin, then trailed off into the woods heading away from the trail. I followed them a bit, but lost the prints after 50 yards. I don't know if the person doubled back or just got careful. Either way, they were gone. No sign of who it was or why they were there. I debated packing up and heading out that morning, but I figured whoever it was had probably just moved on. Maybe they were a squatter or someone living rough out in the woods. Not uncommon in that part of the country. Still, I kept my knife on me the whole day. Hiked a few miles, did some scouting for sign. Saw a few old tracks and one bare print, but nothing fresh. Still felt weird, though. Couldn't shake that watched feeling. That night, I kept the fire going longer and slept lighter. No footsteps, no sounds. But again, that quiet. That too quiet air that made the trees feel like they were waiting for something. The next day, I figured I'd hike a loop out past the ridge where the old fire tower used to be, then swing back and leave the day after. It was about a 6-mile loop, depending on which game trails I used to cut through the laurel. Halfway through, maybe 3 miles from the cabin, I found something that stopped me cold. A makeshift camp, not like a proper campsite. This was a tarp strung low between 2 trees, piles of trash underneath. Old food wrappers, water bottles, a ratty sleeping bag half covered in leaves. And right beside it, nailed to a tree, was a small plastic mirror, the kind you'd see in a locker or bathroom, and a stained t-shirt hanging from a branch. That shirt had long, dark smudges on it. Didn't look like mud. There were no signs of life right then, but the coals in a small fire pit were still faintly warm. Someone had been there that morning, probably not long before I showed up. I backed out of that camp slow. Didn't touch anything. Didn't call out. I just eased back through the brush and made a wide arc around it, then headed straight back to the cabin. I didn't even stop to eat. Packed my gear, doused the stove, and started hiking back to the truck. I didn't want to be there when the sun went down. Made it to the truck around 5. I kept checking over my shoulder the whole hike out. Nothing followed me, far as I could tell. But I wasn't taking chances. Drove straight to my uncle's house and stayed the night there. Didn't say much. Just told him I cut the trip short. He didn't press. I haven't been back to that cabin since. My uncle doesn't go out there anymore either. He said he heard some stuff recently. Folks seeing lights way off the trail late at night, gear going missing from locked boxes, strange trash showing up by tree stands. He's not the type to spook easy, but he said something's changed out there, that the woods don't feel right anymore. I believe him. I've been in those woods my whole life, and I've never felt anything like I felt that night outside the cabin. That wasn't an animal. That wasn't some harmless lost hiker. That was someone who knew the woods, who moved like they'd done it 100 times. Someone who wanted to scare me, or worse. And the worst part is knowing that whoever it was, they're still out there. Somewhere in those endless trees. Maybe watching, maybe waiting. I still go hiking, still camp, but never alone anymore, and never near that stretch of trail. Some places just stop feeling safe no matter how well you know them. The woods don't care how many summers you spent there. They don't care how careful you are. You're not in charge out there. You never were. I went to college in Southwest Virginia, in a small town tucked between the mountains. It was one of those places that looks nice enough on a sunny day. Rolling hills, big open skies, a lot of green during the warm months. But once the sun dropped behind the ridges, it was like someone flipped a switch. The woods turned black fast, and the quiet came down even faster. It wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet either. It was the kind that made you feel like something was watching. A lot of the students joked about it, saying the hills were haunted or cursed or whatever. I never believed any of that, but I always had this sense that something about that area wasn't quite right. My junior year, I got into hiking. There were a ton of trails around the region, most of them barely marked. Some were part of the state park system, others just old logging roads or hunting paths. A couple buddies and I would usually go out on the weekends, bring a couple sandwiches, a water bottle, maybe stay out until sunset, then head back to town. But that semester, I was going through some stuff and I started going out on my own, mostly to clear my head. I figured if I was going to feel lost and restless, I might as well do it in a place where no one could bother me. There was this trail maybe 20 minutes from campus. No signs, just a gap in the tree line past a pull-off on the side of the highway. A gravel road went up a hill and then disappeared into forest. Someone told me it used to be a fire road, maybe used in the 80s, but it had been abandoned a long time ago. The first time I walked it, I felt this weird pull, like I was going somewhere I wasn't supposed to, but I brushed it off. I thought maybe it was just the silence or the way the trees grew close together at certain parts, like they were leaning in to watch. The trail climbed gradually for the first mile or two, then leveled out along a ridge. There were old rusted barrels off to one side, probably from logging trucks, and once in a while I'd see bones, deer mostly, I think. Nothing strange about that, not in those parts. But I remember noticing how dry everything felt up there. Even when it had rained the night before, the soil along that ridge always seemed hard and cracked. The trees were tall but thin, like they were still fighting to grow. No underbrush either, just a layer of brittle leaves and broken twigs. You could see through the trees for a good 100 yards in any direction. I started going out there almost every other day. The more time I spent on that trail, the more comfortable I felt. Or maybe comfortable isn't the right word. Familiar is more like it. Like I started to understand the place in a way I didn't expect. I knew where the trees thinned, where the wind always picked up, where the crows liked to land around noon. I even found a little overlook just past a bend in the trail, where the ridge dropped off and you could see for miles. I'd sit there sometimes and eat lunch or just watch the clouds move across the sky. But the comfort didn't last. One afternoon, I got a late start. I had a class that ran long, then I stopped for gas. And by the time I made it to the trail, it was already creeping toward evening. I debated turning around, but figured I'd just hike to the overlook and come back. I had my flashlight, a little cheap one that took AA batteries, and I thought that'd be enough. The first half of the hike was normal. Nothing unusual, just that steady uphill push through the trees. It wasn't until I passed the barrels that I started to feel off. It's hard to explain. It wasn't that I heard anything or saw anything weird. It was more like something had shifted in the air. The temperature dropped, just slightly, but enough to make me notice. And it got really still. No birds, no rustling, just the sound of my own boots crunching the trail. I kept walking, slower than usual. The trees on both sides of the trail seemed darker somehow, even though there was still some light coming through the canopy. When I reached the bend before the overlook, I stopped. I don't know why. I just stood there, staring down the path. It looked the same as always, same bend, same rocky edge, but I couldn't make myself move. Something felt wrong about going forward. I started scanning the woods, trying to spot anything unusual, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. Then I heard the sound. Not loud, not close, but definitely there. It was a thump, just one, dull, heavy, like something dropping onto the ground. Then nothing. I waited a few seconds, holding my breath. Then I heard it again. Thump, same sound, same distance. It didn't repeat after that. I stood still, listening, but everything was quiet. I told myself it was probably a branch falling, or maybe a deer stepping wrong. But something about it didn't sit right. I turned around and started heading back. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards down the trail, just off to the left, there was a shape. Not moving, not clearly defined. It looked like someone crouching behind a tree. I couldn't see a face or any details, just the outline, dark against the lighter tree bark. My first instinct was to call out, but I stopped myself. Instead, I just kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I strayed ahead. As I passed the spot where I saw the shape, I glanced sideways. Nothing there. That's when I started to hear the footsteps. Behind me, soft at first, not constant. A few steps, then a pause, then a few more. I picked up my pace. The trail wasn't steep, but it was uneven, and I didn't want to trip. I kept my flashlight in one hand, not turning it on yet. There was still just enough daylight to see the path, but the shadows were thick, and I didn't want to lose the trail. I kept walking, heart pounding, trying not to look back. The footsteps stayed behind me, never too close, never too far. Always just there. About a mile from the road, the trail forked. Left was the main path. Right led toward the lower ridge where we used to see deer sometimes. I figured whoever or whatever was following me would expect me to stay on the main trail. So I went right, off the familiar path, into deeper woods. The new trail was barely visible, just a faint depression in the leaves. I moved quickly but carefully, ducking under branches, avoiding loose rocks. The footsteps didn't follow immediately, but after a few minutes, I started hearing them again. Closer this time. I broke into a jog. Not full speed, but enough to widen the gap. The trail wound downhill, then opened into a small hollow. I slipped once on wet leaves but caught myself. My flashlight beam jumped in front of me, swinging with each step. The light was dying. The batteries were old. I hadn't planned on staying out this late. I reached a dry creek bed and crouched behind a fallen log. I turned off the flashlight and waited, breathing through my mouth, ears straining. The woods were silent again. For a minute, I thought maybe I lost whoever was back there. Then I saw movement. Across the creek bed, up the hill, a shape moved between the trees. It wasn't crouching now. It was upright. Still no details. Just a silhouette. Human size. Maybe a little taller. It moved slowly, like it was scanning the ground, looking for something. I didn't wait. I crept along the log, then cut uphill through brush and saplings. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to get back to the road. Felt like I was walking forever. My legs were shaking. My hands were scraped up from branches. The flashlight gave out completely. I was moving through blackness now, using my feet to feel the ground. The trees thinned a little, then I saw headlights. Faint at first, then brighter. I stumbled out onto the gravel road, waving my arms. A truck passed without stopping, but I saw the pull-off ahead, and beyond that, my car. I didn't look back. When I got in the car, I locked the doors and sat there for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine. I drove back to my apartment and didn't say a word to anyone for days. I never went back to that trail. A few weeks later, I tried to find it again, just to prove to myself it wasn't a big deal. But I couldn't. The pull-off was gone. Or maybe I just couldn't recognize it anymore. The road looked the same, but the spot I thought I remembered was overgrown with weeds and saplings. No gap in the trees. No trail. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know who or what was following me. But I do know this. There are places in those woods where people don't go for a reason. It's not about ghosts or monsters. It's about the things people do when they think no one's watching. About the ones who don't want to be found. About the dark parts of the world that don't care whether you come back. I've moved on since then. Graduated. Got a job. Live in a city now. But every so often, when I hear footsteps behind me or walk past a stretch of woods at night, I remember how quiet it was up on that ridge. How something followed me without making a sound. How easy it is to disappear in a place like that. And how lucky I was that I didn't. I'm not superstitious, never have been, but there is something strange about the Appalachian Mountains. People talk about it like it's some kind of running joke, but when you actually spend time deep in those woods, alone or even with just one or two others, it starts to settle into you. That thick silence, that endless, dripping green. You realize how easy it would be to vanish out there and how no one would ever know what really happened. Back in my early 20s, a few years after high school, I got into backcountry hiking. Not the casual kind. I mean, disappearing into the woods for days with nothing but a pack, a map, and a plan scratched out on the back of a receipt. I liked the solitude. I liked being where phones didn't work. I liked the idea of not being able to check out if things got too hard. That summer, I had a break between jobs, and I took off for the Southern Appalachians. I drove down from Pennsylvania to a trailhead in North Carolina, just south of Asheville. The plan was a week-long loop that would take me deep into Pisgah National Forest, down near areas where the hills get jagged and old logging roads split off into nowhere. The first 2 days were uneventful. I crossed paths with a couple groups, mostly older hikers or folks with dogs. Everyone looked just as sweaty and bug-bitten as me. The trail was well-marked, and the forest was thick but peaceful. You get used to the rhythms. Early mornings, the crunch of boots, the smell of pine and mud. Nights were quiet, full of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. Things changed on the third day. It started with little things. My compass didn't seem to line up with the map I had. I figured it was a magnetic interference from some iron deposit or something. Not that unusual in certain parts of the country. I adjusted and kept going. Then my water filter broke. Again, inconvenient but manageable. I boiled what I needed and pushed on. But late that afternoon, I reached a split in the trail that wasn't on my map. There was no signage, just a faint trail that veered left and down into a gully, and another that climbed a steep ridge. I was supposed to go west, and the ridge trail pointed that way. I made a mental note of the junction and climbed. By dusk, I knew something was wrong. The trail had faded until it was barely a game path. My legs were scraped up from brush, and the air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. I set up camp in a small hollow. I didn't even bother with a fire. That night was the first time I heard it. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't an animal call. It wasn't wind. It was a rhythm, a thumping, faint but steady. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then nothing. Just the usual night sounds. I stayed awake for another hour, staring into the black woods. I hiked hard the next day, trying to reconnect with my original route. But it was like the forest had shifted around me. Landmarks didn't line up. Elevation changes didn't match my notes. I should have turned around, retraced my steps, but I was too far in and stubborn. I was sure the trail would loop back. On the 5th morning, I found the first structure. It wasn't marked on any map, and it didn't look like anything maintained. Just an old wooden cabin, half collapsed, covered in moss. I stood staring at it for a long time. No paths led to it. No signs of recent use. Inside was empty except for a rotting chair and a hole in the floorboards. I kept moving. That evening, I found the clearing. It was sudden. One moment I was pushing through undergrowth, and the next I stepped into open space. The clearing was perfectly round, maybe 20 yards across, with bare dirt in the center. In the middle was a ring of stones, and inside it, ashes. Old ashes. Cold. There were no footprints. No signs of recent activity. Just that feeling again, like the air was holding its breath. That night, I heard the thumping again. Closer. I didn't sleep. On day 6, I started seeing the markers. They were subtle sticks stacked like teepees, rocks piled in odd shapes. Once, a strip of faded fabric tied around a branch. Nothing you wouldn't see in any forest if you weren't paying attention. But out here, they felt wrong. Not random, like someone was trying to show something, or warn. Late that day, I reached a narrow gorge with a stream running through it. It looked familiar, like something from my map, and I followed it west, hoping it would lead to a logging road or trail junction. The gorge twisted sharply, and near a bend, I saw something across the water. It was another cabin, this one intact. It was 2 stories, narrow and tall, with dark boards and a slanted tin roof. The windows were black. No smoke, no smell, no signs of movement. I should have kept walking. Instead, I crossed the stream on a fallen tree and approached it. The door was shut. I didn't try it. I circled around and found a cellar door half sunken into the earth. It looked jammed shut with a rusted latch. There were footprints near it, muddy, old, but unmistakable. That night, I camped uphill, maybe half a mile away. I didn't build a fire. I didn't eat. I just sat with my back against a tree, knife in my hand, staring down the slope. Around midnight, I heard the thumping again. This time, it was followed by something heavier, something dragging. It was distant, but moving, deliberate. I stayed still until dawn. I left everything behind the next morning except water and a compass. I followed the stream west, I kept moving, ignoring everything else. No brakes, no stops. By late afternoon, I heard something, the low growl of a truck engine. I pushed up a ridge and stumbled onto a dirt road just as a forestry crew truck rounded the bend. The two men inside gave me a long look but didn't ask questions when I flagged them down. They drove me an hour to the nearest ranger station. I didn't say much. I just asked for directions to the nearest town. Bought a meal, took a bus, and never went back. That was 12 years ago. I still hike, but not in the Appalachians. There's something about that place. Maybe it's just the age of the land, or the way the hills hold sound, or the deep, deep isolation you can find between ridgelines. Maybe it was all just in my head, the product of exhaustion and disorientation. But there are too many stories, too many strange maps, too many hikers who never made it back. The forest doesn't care if you believe in anything. It just swallows you if you're not careful. I was out in the hills of West Virginia, not far from the edge of the Monongahela Forest, deep into that tangled mess of trees and rocky slopes where most people don't go unless they're hunting or just plain lost. I wasn't doing either, really. I was just out there because I liked the quiet. I liked walking where I didn't have to hear engines or people. The woods out there, they have a kind of silence that feels heavier than air. You don't just hear it, you feel it. It was fall, late October, and the leaves had already made their turn and started to fall in thick blankets across the ground. They crunch under your boots in a way that carries far, and you get used to moving slow to avoid startling deer or bringing too much attention to yourself. I'd been walking a few hours that morning, just following old game trails and logging paths that hadn't seen fresh wheels in decades. Cold had started to bite into the air, and frost clung to the shadows where the sun hadn't touched. I came over a little rise, the kind where you have to grab saplings to keep your balance on the way down, and that's when I smelled something off. Not just death. I've smelled dead animals plenty of times. Rotting possum, deer left behind by hunters who took the rack and left the rest, that kind of thing. But this was sharper, more metallic, like something between rot and blood and rusted iron. The smell hit me in the face and made me stop mid-step. At first I thought it might be a fresh kill. Maybe a buck got caught up on a fence or broke its leg trying to clear a downed log and some coyotes found it. That kind of thing happens. But it was quiet. No birds, no yipping coyotes, not even the sound of squirrels chattering. I crouched low and moved slow through the trees, careful with my steps. I didn't want to spook anything if something was still eating. That's when I saw the deer, a big doe, lying on her side in a little clearing covered with leaves. Her front half looked normal, no damage to the head or chest. Eyes open but not popped like they do when they're scared. But from her hips back, it was gone. Not just eaten, but stripped clean down to the bone. Pelvis, legs, the tail, all picked clean like someone had taken a saw and knife and cleaned it for meat but left it right there. The spine was exposed, and the ribs from the back end jutted up at strange angles. No drag marks, no blood trail, just her, like she had laid down and half of her body disappeared. Stopped me cold. I looked around trying to make sense of it, but before I could process it, I spotted the coyote, maybe 10, 15 feet away, downhill a little from where the deer lay. Same story. Whole front half was intact, tongue lolling out, teeth bared a little in that way they do when they die. And then from the midsection back, just gone. Same clean appearance, bone showing, no sign of tearing, no mess like you'd expect from a larger predator. Just gone. My stomach turned over. Coyotes don't get taken like that. They're not top of the food chain, sure, but they don't go down without a fight, and they definitely don't lie down to be eaten. I moved closer and studied the ground. Nothing. No tracks. No claw marks. No drag signs. Just undisturbed leaves all around like nothing had moved through. It was like these animals just dropped dead and something had scooped out the same half of each of them without leaving a trace. I took a few steps further and saw the fox. Same story. Smaller, a red fox this time, but the pattern was identical. Face and chest intact, eyes glassy and lifeless. Hindquarters clean to the bone, and again, no signs of struggle. The spacing was odd, too, almost deliberate. Each one was about the same distance apart, forming a crooked line going down the slope. No blood spatter, no flies, no birds. I spent the better part of 30 minutes just circling the area, scanning every tree and bush. I looked for prints, bent grass, claw marks on bark, scat, anything. But the leaves were untouched. Not even a game trail nearby. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. At some point, I realized how still everything was. The wind had died completely, and even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. I had this rising feeling in my chest, a kind of pressure like something heavy was sitting just behind my sternum. It wasn't fear exactly, more like instinct. My body knew something was wrong even if my brain was still trying to catch up. I felt like I was being watched, but not by an animal. The woods weren't curious. They weren't even quiet in that normal way. They were holding back, like something else had taken over, and everything else had decided to shut up and stay still. I pulled my phone out to take pictures, thinking I should document it, maybe send it to a wildlife biologist I knew through a friend. But I had no service, and when I opened the camera, it wouldn't focus right. The pictures came out blurry and gray, like there was something foggy in the lens even though it looked clean. I tried wiping it off, but nothing helped. After a few minutes of messing with it, I gave up. The unease had grown strong enough that I could barely keep my hands steady. I started backing out the way I came, slow and careful. Every few steps I looked behind me. The trees pressed in tight on both sides, branches creaking under their own weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had done that to the animals was still around, maybe even watching from behind one of those thick trunks. But I never saw movement, never heard anything but my own boots on the leaves. By the time I made it back to the logging road where I had parked, the sun was lower and the shadows were stretching long. The smell of rot had faded, but I still had it in my nose. I got in the truck and locked the doors before I even started the engine. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, gripping the wheel tight with both hands. When I finally drove off, I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't slow down. I just put miles between me and that place as fast as I could without flying off the road. Later that night, I tried to draw the layout of where the animals had been. I wanted to make sense of it, but no matter how I mapped it out, it didn't come out right. The spacing, the condition of the bodies, the way nothing else in the woods had been disturbed, none of it added up. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I knew how it would sound. Some people would say it was a prank or a weird disease or scavengers with a very specific pattern. But there were no scavengers. Nothing came near those bodies while I was there. No birds, no bugs, not even ants. And the way they were arranged, with the same exact damage, it wasn't natural. It wasn't random. Eventually, I told a guy I knew who hunted farther up in the hills. I didn't go into detail, just said I found something strange and thought he should keep an eye out. He nodded like he understood, but I could see in his eyes he didn't want to know more. He didn't ask, and I didn't offer. I never went back to that spot. I still hike the woods sometimes, still enjoy the quiet, but I stay farther west now, closer to towns and roads and people. I don't let myself get too deep. Not anymore. Somewhere out there, something did that. Not a ghost, not a monster, something real, something with a pattern and a purpose. And I was lucky it didn't want me. I remember that drive through rural Missouri like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago. It was one of those trips where nothing much was planned. Just me and a buddy driving around, looking for quiet roads and empty fields to clear our heads. We'd been stuck in the city too long, and the idea of cruising down forgotten back roads, windows down, air thick with the smell of trees and earth, was exactly what we needed. We were in a beat-up old pickup, the kind that rattled when you hit anything more than a small bump. My friend was behind the wheel, and I was in the passenger seat, half listening to some radio station playing classic rock. The sun was low, just starting to lean toward the horizon, casting everything in that orange-gold light that makes the woods look almost peaceful. The road we took was one of those single-lane dirt and gravel tracks, barely wide enough for one car, winding deep into the trees. No street signs, no names on the map, just a line cutting through the thick woods, fading in and out of patches of sunlight and shadow. We didn't know it then, but that road was a dead end. The deeper we drove, the quieter it got. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just the crunch of tires over the gravel and the occasional snap of a twig under a deer's hoof somewhere just out of sight. The trees grew taller and closer together, their branches forming a dense roof above us that filtered out most of the daylight. The air felt heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. My friend glanced over a few times, his expression tightening. I felt it too, that creeping sense that something was off. After about 15 minutes, the road just stopped. It didn't curve or split. It just ended abruptly in a small clearing, maybe 40 feet across. The dirt was packed hard and dry, but what caught my attention first was the smell. A rotten, sickly stench that made my stomach turn. That's when I saw them. A circle of dead deer, laid out perfectly in a ring, their bodies arranged with unnatural precision. There were at least 10 of them, bucks, does, all sizes. Their legs folded neatly under them like someone had arranged them carefully, not just tossed them there. Their eyes were wide open, glassy and empty, and their fur was matted with dirt and something darker I didn't want to think about. The circle was tight, too tight to be a coincidence. It looked deliberate, like some sort of grotesque ritual, but I pushed that thought away. We weren't dealing with cult stuff or some fairy tale nonsense. This was real, and it was wrong. The ground inside the circle was strangely clean, free of leaves or debris, almost as if someone had swept it before placing the deer there. I swallowed hard and looked at my friend, who was staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The feeling between us was electric, pure, raw unease. I remember turning the key and the engine sputtering to life, tires kicking up dust and gravel as we backed out carefully. The truck's headlights cut through the dimming light, but the woods felt darker than before. The sense of being watched grew heavier with every foot we put between us and that clearing. I glanced in the rearview mirror and thought I saw movement between the trees, but when I blinked it was gone. We didn't stop until we hit the main highway, where the hum of cars and streetlights felt like a shield against the quiet menace of those woods. Later, I tried to make sense of what we saw. Was it hunters? Poachers? Some sick person playing games? I read stories about deer mutilations and strange animal killings, but those were always dismissed as hoaxes or wild animal attacks. This was different. This was deliberate. I never reported it. Part of me thought the cops wouldn't care, and another part worried that whatever was out there might come looking if we poked too hard. The memory still haunts me. Every time I close my eyes, I see those lifeless eyes staring back, the perfect circle, the smell of decay. I learned that sometimes the woods don't just hide animals or secrets. They hide things you don't want to find. Things that remind you how fragile and small you really are. We drove into that dead-end road looking for peace. Instead, we found something darker, and we got out alive, but only just. I remember that drive through rural Missouri like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago. It was one of those trips where nothing much was planned. Just me and a buddy driving around, looking for quiet roads and empty fields to clear our heads. We'd been stuck in the city too long, and the idea of cruising down forgotten back roads, windows down, air thick with the smell of trees and earth, was exactly what we needed. We were in a beat-up old pickup, the kind that rattled when you hit anything more than a small bump. My friend was behind the wheel, and I was in the passenger seat, half listening to some radio station playing classic rock. The sun was low, just starting to lean toward the horizon, casting everything in that orange-gold light that makes the woods look almost peaceful. The road we took was one of those single-lane dirt and gravel tracks, barely wide enough for one car, winding deep into the trees. No street signs, no names on the map, just a line cutting through the thick woods, fading in and out of patches of sunlight and shadow. We didn't know it then, but that road was a dead end. The deeper we drove, the quieter it got. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just the crunch of tires over the gravel and the occasional snap of a twig under a deer's hoof somewhere just out of sight. The trees grew taller and closer together, their branches forming a dense roof above us that filtered out most of the daylight. The air felt heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. My friend glanced over a few times, his expression tightening. I felt it too, that creeping sense that something was off. After about 15 minutes, the road just stopped. It didn't curve or split. It just ended abruptly in a small clearing, maybe 40 feet across. The dirt was packed hard and dry, but what caught my attention first was the smell. A rotten, sickly stench that made my stomach turn. That's when I saw them. A circle of dead deer, laid out perfectly in a ring, their bodies arranged with unnatural precision. There were at least 10 of them. Bucks, does, all sizes. Their legs folded neatly under them like someone had arranged them carefully, not just tossed them there. Their eyes were wide open, glassy and empty, and their fur was matted with dirt and something darker I didn't want to think about. The circle was tight, too tight to be a coincidence. It looked deliberate, like some sort of grotesque ritual, but I pushed that thought away. We weren't dealing with cult stuff or some fairy tale nonsense. This was real, and it was wrong. The ground inside the circle was strangely clean, free of leaves or debris, almost as if someone had swept it before placing the deer there. I swallowed hard and looked at my friend, who was staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The feeling between us was electric, pure, raw unease. I remember turning the key and the engine sputtering to life, tires kicking up dust and gravel as we backed out carefully. The truck's headlights cut through the dimming light, but the woods felt darker than before. The sense of being watched grew heavier with every foot we put between us and that clearing. I glanced in the rearview mirror and thought I saw movement between the trees, but when I blinked it was gone. We didn't stop until we hit the main highway, where the hum of cars and streetlights felt like a shield against the quiet menace of those woods. Later, I tried to make sense of what we saw. Was it hunters? Poachers? Some sick person playing games? I read stories about deer mutilations and strange animal killings, but those were always dismissed as hoaxes or wild animal attacks. This was different. This was deliberate. I never reported it. Part of me thought the cops wouldn't care, and another part worried that whatever was out there might come looking if we poked too hard. The memory still haunts me. Every time I close my eyes, I see those lifeless eyes staring back, the perfect circle, the smell of decay. I learned that sometimes the woods don't just hide animals or secrets. They hide things you don't want to find, things that remind you how fragile and small you really are. We drove into that dead-end road looking for peace. Instead, we found something darker, and we got out alive, but only just. I'm no stranger to old houses, forgotten places, and the quiet of the woods. I've always been drawn to exploring, not the touristy kind, but the kind where no one goes, the places people avoid or forget. Old cabins, abandoned farms, rusted barns, anything with a story buried in the dirt and dust. So when I heard about the rundown property deep in the forest, I knew I had to check it out. The place was out past the last paved road, miles into a thick patch of trees that seemed to swallow the sun in the afternoon. The dirt road that led there was more like a trail, rough, bumpy, and narrow. My truck shook and rattled as I drove, tires crunching over loose rocks and dry leaves. The map showed a few other cabins nearby, but nothing occupied in years. Perfect. When I arrived, the house sat low and crooked on a small clearing. It looked like it had been left in a hurry. The wood was faded and peeling, windows cracked or boarded up. There was an old rusted swing set in the yard, chains creaking in the breeze. A thin layer of dust coated everything. It felt like the kind of place that swallowed sound, where footsteps barely made a whisper. I parked a good distance away and started on foot. My pack had the usual essentials: water, food, a flashlight, a basic first aid kit, and a small crowbar I always brought just in case. I wasn't planning to break in or steal anything, just to explore and maybe find something interesting for my collection of photos and stories. The front door was locked, but not well. A few hard pushes and it gave way with a moan. The air inside was thick with stale dust and something faintly sour, maybe mold or rot. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the silence felt heavy. I started by exploring the main floor, shining my flashlight into corners and behind broken furniture. There were old newspapers stacked in one room, yellowed and torn, dating back over 20 years. A faded calendar hung on the wall, stuck on the month of August. Nothing seemed out of place, except the coldness that felt wrong for a summer day. I moved cautiously toward the basement door in the corner of the kitchen. It was a heavy wooden door with rusty hinges. I pulled on the handle, but it was stuck tight. With the crowbar, I pried the edges, and the door slowly gave way to a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. I flicked on my flashlight and started down the steps. The air grew colder, damp and musty. The walls were stone and rough. At the bottom, I found myself in a small concrete room, a basement that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. That's when I saw it. In the center of the floor was a large metal hatch. It was rectangular, built into the concrete floor, with heavy iron bars securing it. It looked like it led deeper underground. I bent down to inspect it, running my fingers over the cold metal. The hatch had a rusty lock. I couldn't open it. What caught my attention was what sat on top of it. An old washing machine. A huge, bulky, cast-iron washing machine, rusted and covered in dirt, placed deliberately over the hatch. It was heavy enough that no one could move it without a serious effort. The kind of weight that was meant to keep the hatch shut, locked in place, and prevent anything from coming out or going in. My heart skipped. The thought hit me hard and fast. Whoever placed that washing machine there didn't want anyone opening that hatch. Not just that, they didn't want anyone getting out. I stepped back, looking around the basement. Nothing else was there. No furniture, no tools, no signs of someone living or working. But that hatch and the washing machine told a different story. A story of something buried, hidden, or trapped below. I pulled out my phone and tried calling someone. Anyone. No signal. I wasn't surprised. The forest was deep and remote. I considered walking back to the road to find help. But the sun was already low in the sky. I needed to think carefully. That night, I camped nearby in my tent, uneasy but unwilling to leave the place until I understood it better. I kept looking over my shoulder, imagining someone or something watching from the shadows. The woods were alive with noises, twigs snapping, animals moving, leaves rustling, but nothing human, or so I thought. The next morning, I explored the house more thoroughly. I found a basement window partially covered with a rotted board, letting in a sliver of light and fresh air. I peered outside and noticed faint tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. I also found scrap papers and old notes hidden in the walls behind a loose board in the living room. They were faded and stained, some pages torn or burned at the edges. The writing was messy but desperate, mentions of traps, escape, and warnings not to open the hatch. One note had a scrawled map showing an underground tunnel system beneath the property. I realized then this place wasn't just an abandoned cabin, it was a trap or a prison. Someone had been trapped or locked down there, or something dangerous was kept underground. The washing machine wasn't just a weight, it was a barrier, a warning. My skin crawled. I took pictures of everything, the hatch, the notes, the marks on the floor. I tried again to call for help. Still no signal. I spent the next day retracing the tire tracks, hoping to find whoever had been here. I walked for miles through the forest, but found nothing. No vehicles, no signs of people, just more trees and silence. When I returned, I noticed the washing machine had shifted slightly, as if someone had moved it, or something. I didn't sleep well that night. Every crack and creak in the dark had me wide awake, listening for footsteps or voices. I felt like I was being hunted or watched, but I couldn't see anything. The forest had swallowed all sound, all life. On the third day, I packed up, deciding I had enough. I needed to get out and report this to the authorities. But just as I was about to leave, I heard the faintest sound, a whisper of movement from beneath the hatch. My blood ran cold. I didn't touch the washing machine. I didn't try to open the hatch. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. Then I flagged down a passing car. The driver called the police while I sat on the side of the road, shaking and exhausted. The police arrived quickly and came with equipment to investigate. They moved the washing machine aside and opened the hatch. What they found inside was worse than I could have imagined. A narrow, damp tunnel carved into the earth, with remnants of chains and old clothes, as if someone had been held captive there. There was no one alive, but the signs of a struggle and desperation were clear. The authorities began searching the area for whoever had done this. Turns out, the cabin had belonged to a man with a violent past, reported missing years ago. The tunnel was a hidden prison beneath the house, used to trap someone for a long time. The washing machine was his way of making sure no one got out or that no one found out. I never went back to those woods. The feeling of being watched never left me. Every time I close my eyes, I see that heavy washing machine, blocking the hatch, sealing whatever horrors were down there. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I've seen rough places and tough situations. But that was different. That was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones people hide deliberately, places meant to trap and silence forever. And I dodged that bullet.